All right, everyone. Welcome to today's Step Up Standard and Spotlight show. My name is Nyna Caputi, and I'm really excited to bring a very important topic to discuss today, diversity, equity, and inclusion in the workplace. And I have an amazing panel of speakers that will share their expertise and insights and tips and strategies on how to improve DEI in the workplace and beyond. So I'm going to very briefly actually just call out their names, and then I'll have them share a little bit more so about their journey to diversity, equity, and inclusion. And I'd like to add belonging too, because I know that's such an important part as well. So we have Seema Daryani from Google, Nicole Todd from Gartner, Tushi from Culture Amp, Liana Louis from Lucid Motors, and Dr. Vanessa Perry, who is a DEI consultant. So if in this order, each of you can go ahead and share briefly what you do and your journey to getting into the DEI field, I would really appreciate it. Maybe we just, for the sake of the floor, let's go in the order that you're listed on this LinkedIn Live. And thank you so much for joining me, everyone.
Sounds good. Thanks, Dana. This is Seema Daryani. I'm a global DEI lead business partner at Google in the consumer tech area. And how I got to this role, I kind of started my career in talent, and I was focused on executive talent and bringing in underrepresented groups at the executive level so that, eventually we could basically have underrepresented groups see themselves in leadership. Though, going through that, I would see that we would have a hard time retaining folks. And so I switched up about 6 or 7 years ago and focused more on how to create a psychologically safe space for underrepresented groups to thrive. And so that's what I'm doing right now at Google. I'm going to pass it on to Nicole.
Hello, everyone. So I've been in the DEI space for over 15 years. I started by engaging with the ERGs, so the employee resource groups. I helped kicked off the company's first Black and Hispanic ERG back in 2005. And, I was impacting the company's culture and creating sense of belonging and overall increasing employee engagement without even trying or knowing, right? I was just volunteering and doing something that I was very passionate about. And then after serving in that capacity for about 7 years, I was offered an opportunity to lead the DEI strategy for PepsiCo's beverage sector, which then was about 65,000 employees across 400 locations in the US and Canada. And that's what officially kicked off my DEI journey. So I've been able to leverage my DEI experience and influence other aspects of the business, like talent management. I've done some work in corporate social responsibility. And now I'm leading, DEI recruiting strategy and talent acquisition for Gartner. I'll pass it over to, I think that's Trustee. Is that, are you next? Okay.
It's Tashi.
Tashi.
Thank you. I'm Tashi Marugues. I'm the Equitable Design and Impact Lead at Culture Amp. And I took a little different spin on how I wanted to introduce myself in terms of my DEI journey. It started with my personal experiences as an immigrant woman of color. I'm from an ethnic minority group in my birth country of Sri Lanka and my academic background as well. So pushing for equitable processes is a large part of who I am as a person. And professionally, my journey started in DEI by way of operations and program management experiences in the professional development, talent, and the nonprofit industry. So I'm so excited to be here and learn from the rest of you. So I'll pass it off to Liana.
Hi, everyone. I'm Liana Louis. I use pronouns she and her. My DEI journey, again, like Tishy, started off with my own personal experience. I suffer from posterior orthostatic tachycardia syndrome. And so I've had to fight for my own disability rights, starting off in college when I got diagnosed with that. And then I entered many male-dominated fields, starting off in baseball, where I just faced racial and gender discrimination and just had to be an advocate for myself. And I figured I actually got my first formal taste through Major League Baseball and got involved with their diversity and inclusion program, I think like 8 years ago now. I can't believe that. Really emphasizing like Asians in baseball, which you don't think is a minority in a lot of places, but it is in that field. And then I ended up going to Nordstrom, where I help kind of bring it back and really challenge our late CEO, Blake, to start, we call it diversity, inclusion, belonging there. And then I got impacted by the pandemic and found a role here at Lucid Motors, where I help create equitable and inclusive cultures here, really running the programs. And I have a counterpart that does all the L&D. So really excited to be here. I'm going to pass it off to Dr. Vanessa Perry.
Thank you. So I'm so happy to be here. So my DEI journey really started probably almost 30 years ago. So I'm kind of dating myself. And it really started out in public health, where I worked in communities of color around health equity primarily. I worked in HIV and AIDS and minority health and health disparities, and subsequently moved into really racial equity, diversity, and inclusion in the government, where I was in the Obama administration, focusing on access to care issues, and then has really just moved into various sectors, including, the tech sector, finance, philanthropic organizations. So really my goal in the work that I do is really dismantling systemic racism and focusing on anti-racism, specifically those that impact Black and Brown communities, because I do realize that if we're not affecting and impacting and dismantling systemic racism, ultimately there is no diversity and there is no inclusion or belonging until we begin to have those conversations. So thank you for having me, and I'm just looking forward to engaging in the conversation today.
Thank you all so much. Those were very insightful and inspiring stories about how you got into this field. I realized I didn't introduce myself, so I'm Nyna Caputi. As you can guess from my accent, I'm originally from India, been in the US since 2002. And I think Tushi had mentioned, being an immigrant woman of color, I did fare some amount of discrimination. I remember the first job I applied for in the US, I didn't get hired for, and I heard through another source that they didn't hire me because they didn't like my accent. And that really affected me. And also when I worked in India, I worked in a very male-dominated company, and I was a manager, but and the other managers were all men. And my supervisor wanted me to address him as Mr. So-and-so instead of by his first name, because I was a woman. I had to eat lunch with the secretaries while all the men got to sit together and eat. And it bothered me. And at that time, diversity, inclusion, equity was not a thing in India. Maybe things have changed. But now when I look back, I realize how I was discriminated against. And I now run a platform for international women. And there are a lot of women of color, a lot of immigrant women, and they've very often shared that they've been discriminated against because of the color of their skin, because they've studied in a country that's not Western, or they face ageism, or they look different, they sound different. And so it became very important to me to make this part of the Expat Woman platform. And I've hosted some DE&I events when San Francisco was open before the lockdown. I've had Liana on my panel. I've had Seema speak on several panels. And then I was really excited to connect with Nicole, Tushi, and Dr. Vanessa Perry on LinkedIn and have them join me for this discussion. So with that being said, and a little introduction about myself, and I know that diversity, inclusion, equity, belonging, touches people in so many different ways. And I just want to, and that's why I wanted to bring all of you together, because I think it's a really diverse and fantastic panel based on all your experiences and your own personal stories. So my next question is, what are some of the top things companies can do to make the company more focused on DEI-B and, so diversity, equity, inclusion, belonging, what can they do? Because I know a lot of companies struggle with what should I do? Should I just hire one person of color and then my job is done? So I'd love to hear from each of you what your top 1 or 2 tips or strategies. And again, let's follow. Maybe this time we'll start the other way. We'll start with Dr. Vanessa, Liana, Tushi, Nicole, and Seema. So go ahead, Dr. Vanessa Perry.
Sure. Well, I think from my perspective, the first thing that organizations need to do is they need to ensure that they have the buy-in from the top down. So if there is no leadership from the top down, someone who actually has a vision for what diversity, equity, and inclusion should look like in the organization, it's going to be very difficult to implement a strategy. The second part of that is really ensuring that there is a strategy and that you have the right people in place who are there to help develop that strategy and implement that strategy from, really soup to nuts, down to evaluation, and really engaging everyone in the process.
Along with that, I think a lot of companies tend to focus on recruiting diverse and underrepresented talent first. I think it's more important to build a culture of belonging, so you're not wasting all this time trying to recruit all this diverse talent. Really focus on creating a safe space where people can really bring their most authentic and best version of themselves to work without code switching. And again, like Dr. Perry said, it really does have to have buy-in. Otherwise, even that kind of metric fails. I think something easy, even if a company is not completely bought in yet, is a term that I learned last week called micro-compassions, where we can make little steps to make our colleagues and our team feel like they belong in the company and can really do their best work and shine.
Agree with the both of you in terms of engaging stakeholders and not jumping quickly into focusing on recruiting. I had a similar point with auditing your practices for inclusion and equity internally. So we can't focus on representation without addressing inequitable practices systematically that we have internally. So how are we going to fix that is I have a data-driven role, so I would say start with the data. What kind of data do you have, and what kind of metrics do you want to measure? Because you can't show progress if you're not actually measuring the impact that you're having. So companies already have EEOC data that they collect through their applicant tracking system or within their HRIS system. So taking a look at that data, if you're not doing employee engagement, doing a pulse survey on how certain demographics are experiencing the workplace in an anonymous way to see, where do you need to start? So collect that data, not only from a quantitative perspective, but then also getting some qualitative listening sessions in to see how folks at the company and within different demographics are experiencing the workplace. I'll pass it over to Nicole.
Absolutely. And I actually want to build on that, right? Because that first step is critical, because there's going to be so many things that you need to do, but the results from that type of like baseline assessment where you're looking at that data and leveraging the insights, doing focus groups, hearing what your employees have to say, what your leaders have to say will be necessary, because you could actually use the results from that assessment to help you prioritize where you need to focus your efforts to have the greatest impact. Because when I tell you, in this DEI space, there's tons of things that you want to get started. Like, you mentioned recruiting, right? But let the organization let you know where you need to start, because that's how you will be able to see progress. Pass it over to Seema.
Yeah, I think, everyone mentioned things that absolutely make sense. I know Dr. Perry was talking about hiring and also having just not focusing on one person to solve everything, like essentially having a CDO come in, not give them the correct budget or head count and reporting structure, and then having them be the face of DEI, but and doing everything as a checklist rather than really changing systems and culture. I think just to add on that, I would say focusing on retention and progression as well is really important. I think Doshi mentioned like data and really focusing on what are underrepresented groups' experiences, qualitative and quantitative, and seeing what we can do to make that experience more equitable, even when it comes to performance reviews as well.
Thank you. All those are fantastic strategies. And I can see that all of you have similar thoughts on that. And so thank you for building on each other's input. So I know somebody mentioned employee resource groups, and I know some companies are just starting off, some haven't started as yet. How vital are employee resource groups, and do they really help with creating that feeling of being, belonging? Like when I first moved to the US, I wanted to mix only with other Indians because I missed, my country. You wanted to be with people who looked like you, liked similar things. I mean, it's changed now, and I have a very diverse group of friends and network. But I'm curious, within a company, does sometimes have being part of a group that looks like you, has similar experiences, help with creating that sense of belonging? And how do you get other, because you might have a Black employee resource group, an Asian employee resource group, or a women's employee resource group, but then again, you're just staying within that group. How are you getting the rest of the company involved with understanding the hurdles they face, or even their wins and successes? So just wanted to ask each of you your thoughts on employee resource groups, if you're willing to share about your own company. Does your company have employee resource groups, and what are some of the key things they do? And again, let's start with Seema this time.
Sure. I think ERGs are a little bit tough. I do think it's important to have that safe space to go to. But like you said, Nyna, if you don't get other folks involved, I don't know if you're going to see the change. So where I kind of suggest a little bit of the change is to get some white executives or, other majority groups involved in sponsorship and like executive sponsorship, so that the group has a way to open doors that they normally wouldn't. But then also creating kind of a separate safe space where you can go and get advice from each other, or be there for each other, or celebrate milestones, or celebrate holidays, things like that. But I think it has to be a little bit of both.
Yes, I agree with that, right? So like when I think about the employee resource groups and the value that they bring to the organization, is that they are key to creating that sense of belonging, right? Because they're celebrating their culture. They get to socialize with people who look like them and share the same experiences and backgrounds. But it's also, like to Seema's point, an opportunity to give that exposure to our white colleagues and counterparts to have an understanding, right? And they're also great with providing insights, right? So like if you know that you're pushing out some marketing materials, go to your ERGs to see if it looks right and if it feels right. Also, just leveraging them to provide further education and awareness, because there is diversity within specific ethnic groups and races, right? So it's also a great way to hear the different perspectives of our Black community or group, our Hispanic, and so on. So yeah, I think, ERGs is key to increasing engagement, providing sense of belonging, education, awareness. I'm all for, as you can see, I'm all for and about employee resource groups at organizations.
Me too, Nicole. I am all for ERGs. I'm biased in that part of my role is to manage all of our ERGs at Culture. So when I joined the team, I did formalize our voluntary-led ERGs, and I pay my ERG leaders. I'm really proud of paying our leaders at Culture. We have ERGs at Culture are focused on developing their members, building community, fostering community externally through their ally group. And to Seema's point, we have one executive sponsor for each of our ERG groups, and our ERG groups can decide whether they want someone from within their demographic to represent them as an executive sponsor. But we've seen 2 of our ERG groups actually go to an ally. So our BIPOC ERG group actually has a white male cis sales leader as their ERG executive sponsor, and their work is being amplified in rooms that they're not going into. So I think it's effective to have some executive sponsors, but the key is having clear expectation, not only for ERG leaders on what their roles are, what their roles are not. They're not your talent acquisition. They're not your HR. They're not going to resolve employee relations issues. So giving them a scope of what their responsibilities are, and then also giving our executive sponsors some scope around what their responsibilities are, advising the board, coaching them, giving them strategy, amplifying them in their roles. So I focused a lot on building that governance structure at Culture Amp, because I want to see that impact, because we're tasking them with this important job of creating community and connection, and expecting underrepresented folks to do that work for us without pay, without structure, without development. We are not going to do well if you don't support them in that in the work. So I'm pro ERGs. I can talk about them all day, but I'll pass it over to Liana.
I'm just going to build on what Nicole and Tishy said, because we do all of that. Our first ERG that Lucid started is about to turn 1 year old on our International Women's Day. And to build upon that year after year, one thing that we're focusing on is how do we expose all the hard work that they're doing to the business in terms of different skill sets than what they're doing in their day-to-day job. We're also using the ERGs to really focus in on the even more marginalized, like Nicole kind of mentioned. So within our women's group, we can focus in on their intersectionality and are they trans? Do they fall under a different category, that we can really emphasize that overall DEI programming doesn't necessarily address, but still create that sense of belonging. I like to call our ERGs right now a community of belonging. And since I've started at this role, I've really tried to get them on a journey to understand they're kind of a partner in this business to really help the company get DEI off the ground, since it's such a new journey for Lucid Motors in this really heavy auto industries. So really partnering with them, getting the insights from them, really being they can tell us anything and we can try to work and make things happen. I actually just got off a call before this with one of our ERG leaders in Arizona, and she mentioned something like we would never have insight to little Casa Grande, Arizona, that a lot of women there don't have their GEDs, so they can't even be considered for employment. So working with her to build up a program where we can have the women ERG mentor these women in the city to help get their GEDs and eventually come work for us. And I think there's a lot of things we can do right with the ERG, but like Tisha said, we need to be careful in that we're not making this all of their work, so we're not tokenizing their identity for the profitability of our company long term.
I co-sign everything that everyone said. I come from a different perspective because I'm outside of organizations. And then because I go into a lot of these Fortune 100 companies and nonprofits and foundations, et cetera, the thing that I see that's very helpful about the ERGs is, yes, they provide a sense of belonging. But the one thing that I have seen that has been very helpful in terms of helping others within the company understand is when ERGs come together. So when you have the different affinity groups that come together, and I'm thinking about a specific project that I worked on with a very large financial institution in which they had a women's ERG group, and they wanted to work more with the African American group, and so they brought me in to work with the women's group, and ultimately we had this forum, this amazing forum that went to all the finance executives, and as a result of that, they got the allyship that they were looking for, the sponsorship that they were looking for. So I think that's a great way for ERGs to really work with each other to spread their message of belonging, to get more people engaged so that more people understand what the function is for an ERG, and then ultimately ensure that others within the company, the majority in the company, who, if the individuals are white, that they also are aware of not only what the ERG does, but just the impact of DEI within the organization, within the ERGs, and how ultimately it can impact the entire company.
Thank you all for sharing. And Dr. Vanessa Perry, I'm glad you mentioned about bringing ERGs together, because I also think, besides, the value of bringing groups together, I also think there is discrimination and lack of understanding between different minority groups. Like, just being part of the Indian community, I know they have certain misconceptions or preconceptions about other ethnic groups or other minorities. So I think that's a great strategy. And also, as many of you mentioned, bringing in, people who are not marginalized, into the conversations. Like, recently, I do workshops for ERGs on disrupting imposter syndrome. Recently, I did one for a women's ERG for Indeed, and they wanted to open it up to everyone. They were not sure. They had never opened up their ERG to anyone besides their little ERG, and they opened it up, and there were so many men that joined the conversation, and a lot of women shared about being a woman in a male dominated industry, and about not feeling comfortable enough about speaking up and amplifying their voices. So the men got to hear, they shared that they suffer from imposter syndrome. I mean, this is just one topic, but the conversation was fantastic, and that the lead for that women in ERG was like, this is really good. We need to bring in other people sometimes when we have these discussions around really pertinent topics. So again, I love that all of you think ERGs are so important, and I love that some of you shared about how you can work together and how you can bring in sponsors, maybe male white executives, or so thank you for sharing that. And that being said, some of you have touched upon this about mistakes companies can make when they're focusing on DEIB. But if there's something that you think is a major no, or maybe companies don't even realize they're doing this, they just think they're checking all the boxes. Is there something you think a company could do differently that they're doing right now, but it's not really encompassing the DEIB focus, and they need to change their strategy? And let's start with Dr. Vanessa Perry this time.
Sure. So, I think that the big mistake that a lot of companies make is doing performative DEI. So they want to do trainings, they want to make declarations, they want to have a PR campaign, and things like that. Things that look good on paper, look good to everyone else, but don't ultimately create long-term transformational change within the organization. So I think it's really important to be strategic about the work that you're doing, and as several people said before, following the data, talking to individuals within the organization, asking them what they want, asking them how you can help, asking them what they can change, what are their challenges, what are their barriers, what are their opportunities to improve within the organization itself. So I think that's a really big piece of this work, and we want to make sure that the work is not performative. And so with that, I'll kick it to Liana.
I think all of us are screaming yes, yes, yes in the background. I think a big mistake I've seen a lot of companies make is they have the executive buy-in, they have the lower tier entry-level folks bought in, but they miss that middle senior management, and they don't give them the resources that they need to make mistakes safely, or even learn about how they could be an ally or be an advocate for DEI, and really how to manage their teams correctly within this space. That the whole program just falls flat on their face. There's a lot of microaggressions that go through, and they're just so against it because they weren't involved in the conversation from the start. So I would say, when you're looking at your DEI strategy, look at all levels, not just your executive buy-in, not just the marginalized communities or tend to be in the lower ranking positions that we want to move up, but also look in that sandwich part, because they are a critical part of making any strategy happen within any organization.
Thanks. +1 to the both of you. I'm trying to think of like what would be. There's a lot of mistakes, like not digging into the data, not defining key metrics, not engaging the proper stakeholders. The other piece is like thinking about. You have to start big. You don't have to start big. You could start with small incremental progress that leads to bigger impact. So you don't have to do a big initiative to change the way that the org works, but you can start with small things like, can you do a performance audit? Can you do a promotion audit? Can we look at our hiring practices to see if we're introducing biases in the job description? What are the small things that people can do to start the momentum going, because often we run into that chicken and the egg art. I have to show impact to get resources, but I need resources to make an impact. So we just kind of get stuck and not doing. That's what I've run into in the past, is we just talk about all the things that could go wrong or the things that we don't need, and we just don't act. And we become just performative, just talking and not doing. Passing
Awesome.
it on.
Yeah. So I think one of the mistakes company makes when like implementing the DIB strategy in the workplace is not spending enough time focusing on the equity, right? And I'm learning that a lot of leaders are getting equity and equality confused. So just thinking about it, equity means recognizing individuals of all races, ethnicities, genders, other identities, but as individuals, right? And then recognizing that we do not all start from the same place, and we need to acknowledge and make those adjustments to that imbalance. And one of the ways that companies could do that is, before launching, implementing, or starting anything, ask yourself in teams 2 questions, right? Is this the solution for everyone, right? And do we need more options? So I find that when you have that approach, it'll help, teams and leaders have a more equitable lens, but we're not spending enough time on it. We're spending way too much time on the diversity, right? We're working on like the recruiting strategy, the inclusion with the ERGs, but I do think that making sure that our processes and policies is more equitable is one of the mistakes that companies are making. Over to you, Seema.
Yeah, +1 to everything. I mean, really applying that systemic approach to racial equity is necessary to build sustainable change. And I mean, just thinking of return to office, for example, does this work for everyone? Or, are there certain groups that we need to look into? For example, I'm a mom. Does it make sense to return to office full time? Or, let's basically build a more equitable, flexible approach to that, rather than, saying everyone comes back March 1st, and another thing too, I just think really looking at qualitative data. I mean, people get really wrapped up in the quantitative, but I feel like often executives will say, okay, the DEI team is responsible for this piece here, and the reality is it should be embedded into everyone's role. Like DEI should be everyone's focus. And the way that you can learn more about other underrepresented groups is by talking to them and by understanding their pain and really listening and seeing how you can use that privilege that you have to help others. And so I think that's really key too.
Thank you all so much. And Seema, you alluded to the going back to work. And that's I would like to bring up that question about, and starting with you, and then we go through the everyone else. How has the pandemic affected DEI, and what it, now with working remotely and then maybe hybrid and then going back to work, what kind of impact will it have, and how can companies change this if there are any negative things that come out of it? So go ahead and share.
Yeah, absolutely. I think it's not that remote work will completely get rid of microaggressions, right? Like we will still have that. Though what I do see is for underrepresented groups, they're able to have a safe space at home, a psychologically safe space home, to process these microaggressions. And so for some, it helps to be remote. And I know everyone has a different case. I mean, like I said, I'm a mom. For me, I actually kind of feel like I need to be in the office just to have that separation from home. But we're looking at the data and we're seeing that that everyone has a different experience. So that we need to tailor it so that we can make the most supportive work environment for everyone.
Absolutely. And I want to build on that, right? Because there's a lot of research happening around us and conversations. And research is telling us that employees today expect organizations to support them more holistically through emotional and mental well-being, having that connection at home, right? I'm able now to be here when my kid gets home from school. It's about personal growth, autonomy in their work, and then that sense of shared purpose. So, what this means is that employers will need to humanize their employee value proposition, right? It's about more money, more time, and more opportunity, right? So we'll have to, just thinking about this post-pandemic situation, we'll need to start to treat employees more like people and less like workers if we want them to actually thrive in our organizations. Over to you, Thirsty.
Yeah, plus one. The caregiver piece keeps coming up when we talk about return to office for Culture Amp as well. Just feedback around, there are folks like Seema who are like, I need to get away from my kids or, my caregiving responsibilities. And then there are others who are saying, when there is a shutdown for the classroom because of a COVID case or a daycare shuts down, I don't need to run back to the school to pick my kids up. They can, I'm at home. I don't need to worry about the commuting back and forth. So flexibility is the key, and there is no one size fits all solution. There are folks who are eager to get back into the office, but the messaging needs to be clear that the expectation isn't that all are expected to go back into the office. So this is something that we're working toward. Also thinking about our employees living with disabilities who are immunocompromised. We're not out of the pandemic yet. So putting expectations on like back to office events, what's the equitable way to create those types of spaces and events for folks who don't want to come back to the office. And I think the one thing that I have experienced and I've seen is folks from lower socioeconomic backgrounds who are entering tech, who are trying to financially move up in the world, can actually do that now. They can move to a lower cost city and progress in their careers and don't have to worry about the long commutes that they had to make or the big city rents. So I do think there are caveats to going back to the office, and companies need to be mindful of what is the equitable strategy, not just what's one thing that's going to benefit. There is not going to be one thing that benefits all here.
Lucid actually has been returned to office since before I even started, and it's definitely part of our we're launching our DEI strategy right now, and it's been part of our conversation to even really come up with a formal policy for work from home. So there's kind of equity there, because right now we have some team managers that allow their employees to work hybrid. And then there's some teams, especially dealing with manufacturing in the car, they physically have to be there to make the car. Is there anything we really could do? So I think part of it, if you aren't working from home right now, it should be a discussion, especially when it comes to that talent attraction piece, because right now it is really a candidates market. And so when we're looking at equity within the company to attract the best talent, and especially those from historically excluded populations, it's a discussion that needs to be had. And we acknowledge that at Lucid Motors, but again, we're on this DEI journey that is less than a year old. And so we're really looking at it like, how can we build up a policy with our HR team and not just have it live in the DEI world, because we have a lot more important stuff to take care of as well.
I think it's interesting, and Nicole, I think she hit on it, and it's really about the humanistic workplace at the end of the day, and making sure that you are able to see your workers in their totality and all of their multiple roles. And so one of the things that I find to be interesting, and that I work with a lot of my clients on, who happen to be, state and local government or nonprofits, is helping them to understand, why it works, why individuals can be a little bit more productive in working from home. And just all of the other dynamics they have going on. We are still in a lot of places where, schools are hybrid, and some people have kids that are homes. A lot of people are homeschooling right now, and they don't have the opportunity to go back into the office because they've got to make sure that their school age kids are straight at home. And so I think it's really just about making sure that we are looking at the individuals as a total human, from a holistic perspective, and understanding that, yes, they are a worker, or they are a valuable part of the team, but they are also mothers and husbands and daughters and caretakers for their parents, and things like that. And so those things are very important, take priority, and need to be considered as well, particularly when you're bringing in, people into your organization.
Thank you. And the common thread that I saw in all your sharings was caregivers, whether it's caregivers for kids or elderly parents. So it was really interesting that seems like it would impact people the most, even if you want to run away from your kids, like I did. Having my kids home during the pandemic was hard, but so that, and hopefully people are listening to this now or later, and that's something that is, which a lot of women in my network, I have a network of 13,000 women in the expat women, and many have shared this is one of the struggles they are facing or will face. And the other one, I think Tushi mentioned, if you have health that could be compromised by going back to work because of exposure. So those are really interesting. I didn't, one doesn't even think from a perspective of DEI that, working parents or people are caregiving for their elderly parents this could really impact them, because you've gotten to a certain kind of routine and cadence, and this is going to change that. One thing I did want to bring up, because this is brought up by not many, but some in the expat woman network, is ageism. They say there's a lot of focus on, gender, race, ethnicity, minorities, but ageism seems to be not dealt with, especially with, I live in the San Francisco Bay Area, which is a hub for a lot of tech companies, and everyone is like, again, I don't want to sound discriminatory against younger people, but a lot of people in their late 20s, early 30s, and anyone 40 plus is considered aged out of the system. And I know so many fantastic professionals who are struggling to get jobs because they may be 40 plus, or they work for companies where their supervisors are way younger than them and don't value their experience. Like when I was growing up, my first job in India, you always respected people, and people got promotions based on their seniority and experience. Now it seems to be, I don't know, the trend is changing. So if it's something that hasn't been addressed yet, how can we address it? Because I think ageism is really being swept under the carpet, and people's experience and even life stories and life experiences are not being valued. So would love to hear everyone's take on that. I don't remember, we started with Seema, Vanessa, Dr. Vanessa, but let's start with Dr. Vanessa.
You know, it's very interesting that you even brought that up. I literally was having this conversation with a client earlier this morning who is 50. 51. And I was telling her that that was something that she was going to have to face. She's switching her job. And one of the things that you have is you're trying to go into a workplace where they literally can hire individuals who are younger, either coming out of undergrad or coming out of graduate school, and they can pay them less, right? To do the same amount or more work. So it's really about positioning. And I've found this to be an issue with many individuals who are in their 40s, or particularly those people who are in their 50s at this particular time. And they're just kind of sunsetting on their career. They're looking towards retirement at this particular point, and they're trying to figure out, well, I want to change careers, and this might be the last job that I have before I go into retirement. How can I position myself? And it's a really just a tough question. I don't think people are realizing it. I think people are kind of skating around the issue because, of course, if you're 50 plus, I mean, and I'm 51, I'll be 52 this year, but I don't look that age, nor do I feel that age, right? So you go into the workplace and you're just like, and people are like, wait a minute, you graduated when? Hold on, like, what does this really mean? But I think it's a conversation that we really need to have, and we need to have it sooner rather than later. And people need to be mindful of how they position themselves, which is one of the reasons why, you know, in my leadership development work, when I talk to people, I tell them, take your year of graduation off of your resume. Like, no one needs to know that, you know. And a lot of people, again, you're middle-aged. You're not thinking about, oh, okay, I'm finding a new job. That was just how resumes always were. But it's a whole different game as it relates to even job seeking. What do you put on the resume? How do you position yourself? How do you talk about it so that people know, okay, yes, I do have the experience, right? But I still want this job. I'm not aged out of this job. So it's a conversation that we need to start having sooner rather than later.
So Lucid actually doesn't really have a problem with the hiring older talent, because one of the recruitment strategies is really to bring in that experienced talent. We've actually brought people out of retirement to come work for us. But something that I've done, like, I actually help run DEI for Chi Omega, which is one of the largest women's organizations in the US. And something we do there is we actually equip all our volunteers and even the chapter members on how to interact with the different generations. And we do like a whole session on Gen Zers, millennials, like baby boomers, Gen X, how they really kind of operate and what was their mindset and what was going on at that time. And it's kind of generalized, but really just more on how to communicate and how to like work with different people that don't necessarily have the same thought process with you. I think we really preach that, like, you have to have a empathetic listening ear anytime you interact with someone that is a different age from you, and really try to like question and understand their experience and where they're coming from. Like, and with our collegiate members, we really make sure that they understand that these women that are 70, 80 years old have this incredible story for you to hear. Like, just listen. And a lot of the times when we have these sessions, we try to include like different multi-generational members across the board to listen. And a lot of them build these friendships and actually naturally mentorships that they were not expecting by us even opening up this platform for alumni members and current collegiate members. And I think that's very special. And I've been trying to figure out how I can get this going with our ERG members within our own organization. But like Dr. Perry said, it's a discussion that needs to happen within our organization to really get the understanding. There's not a lot of information like there is with racial inequity or even disability and accessibility accommodation. That's like a data point that we need to discover more of.
Yeah, I think it has come up a couple of times in our processes. So something that we look at is our engagement data using our own software, and we flag whether this is going to be an issue for certain demographics. And where it has come up is, it hasn't come up as like a red flag that we need to action around, but something that we're watching is around how we communicate. So internal communication and processes and introducing of new technology, how that impacts accessibility of certain groups. And then in the benefit review, are we introducing new benefits that that help our aging population of our employees? So are we talking about menopause care for women in the workplace? So that has come up naturally through our women's ERG. They've done some sessions around what it's like to experience menopause and go through the pandemic and career progression. And it's something that I'm thinking about, especially thinking about like parental benefits. There are folks who are later in their life who want to start a family. So what are the benefits that are available from that perspective? Again, there is no formal programming, but it's coming up in a couple of different places. And then to Liana's point, we're scaling as a company, and that means we're bringing in more senior leaders with many years of experience into the company. So it is something that we need to be thinking about. So it's an interesting DEI perspective that is new to many of us, I think.
Yeah, I agree with what everyone said so far, right? We need to make this a topic of discussion now, right? Generational agility. When I think about it, we're living in a world today where we'll have 5 different generations working on one team. And how does that work without some education and awareness? So yes, we need to start talking about it. And I'll share a recent experience that I just had. I had someone tell me, it wasn't until I shared that I had a 26-year-old who's in the Navy. And she's like, oh my goodness, I just thought you was just really too young to be talking about DEI, right? So now it's like, okay, I'm a woman, I'm a Black woman. So now that I look young, I'm not gonna be taken seriously, right? So like, do I need to include me having a 26-year-old son in order for people to take me seriously? So I do think that that's a huge gap right now, and we need to start having conversations on how could we get all of these different generations in a room and just start to have conversation. Because there's probably training out there that could help us with this, but I think that we get more out of just having conversation and listening in a place of understanding, right, each other and what our preferences are, and being able to just flex, right? Because if I'm leading a team and I know I have 5 different generations on a team, I might have to communicate with each of them differently, right? So just being open to do that, and then just not being biased on, again, how someone look and then assuming that they are a certain age. And I agree with Dr. Vanessa. Let's take those graduation dates off of our resumes, right? And then just begin to have the conversation.
Agreed. With everyone, Dr. Vanessa, I did take my date off of my resume too, and also the first couple of years of being out of school and work. But where I definitely feel this in tech, for sure, ageism. And where I feel it most is again being on a team where I'm perhaps one of the few caregivers on the team. And here I am kind of trying to get my career back on track after taking time off for the girls, and then feeling like I'm always playing catch up, and I think that it's really important to support people like that in their work, and it's quite challenging feeling like you're, maybe one of the only caregivers on the team, and trying to manage your career. And then also I think, there is a lot that we can learn too from other folks. I think reverse mentorship can be helpful. Yeah, there's a few things but I do think you're right. I think everyone kind of alluded to this, that this is something that not many are talking about. And I think that it's definitely something that we should explore more.
Thank you all for joining me in that topic, because it's the same thing. I've been working on clients who, are much older, and then they've removed their, education, the years they graduated and the early years. I too have removed mine. And I hope we come to a point where we don't need to hide those, where we can share those, because our years of experience are valued. I would not want my clients to take those years off. I would want people to say, wow, so-and-so has this many years of experience. I want to hire this person, or I want to work with this person, or I want to invite this person to be a speaker, because just by the sheer, value of them having all these years of experience. The same thing with, the color of your skin, where you studied. I mean, I work with immigrants who don't put in their universities or where, they worked in another country, because they feel they'd be discriminated against, because it showcases that they didn't study or work in the US, and then they won't be hired. I know we were going to talk about the bias with hiring, but I think we'll have to leave that for another day, because all of you shared so many amazing insights and values and tips. And I know people have been watching, and everyone's usually, I get people commenting or asking questions, but I think people are paying attention. They don't want to lose like a minute of what you're saying, because even I wanted to add some stuff in the comments, but I was hanging on to every word that you shared. So we are at 11 a.m. I know all of you have really busy schedules. This live will stay on LinkedIn, and it's also in you can watch the replay, and all of you can also share it with your network. And I also have an Expat Women Careers Facebook group, which has about 7,000 plus members. So I also, hopefully it's streamed in there as well. So, because I think this is so inspiring, and maybe people can post questions later or comment, or you can also add any things that we didn't discuss in the comments on LinkedIn. But I just want to thank you all so much for joining me, and for sharing your insights, some of your personal stories, and adding so much value to this conversation. It's the end of Black History Month. We celebrated the Chinese New Year, and now we have Women's History Month and International Women's Day coming up. So I thought this would be very powerful. We're at the cusp of two different very important months. So thank you again, and I hope all of you will connect as well, and I hope to chat individually with all of you, because I'm just inspired with everything that you do. So I'm going to end it, because I don't want to keep you longer, but thank you all, and have a wonderful rest of the day.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you so much. Bye.